Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, October 7th, 2021. Time to begin. I don't know what's going on here. I have the Daily Kos front page open here just to try to find out what's going on. But I'm distracted again. I can't read the news. The earwax ads are back. I don't know what's going on. Is it a time of year thing? Is there something connecting earwax and allergies? I don't know what I'm searching for online, and I keep getting these disgusting earwax ads. And it's really, I got to start looking for, I'm like intentionally searching for something more interesting and visually attractive than these. And I don't know, by the way, if this stuff is coming out of your ears, see a doctor. That's all I can say. Mine has never looked quite like this. And it's really disturbing, and there's a big pile of used Q-tips, essentially, is staring me in the face. And I think, I don't know, is this one of the ones that's, yeah, there's two different kinds of earwax ads actually out there now bothering me. One is, hey, earwax is gross. You're gross for having it, and get rid of it with this, chemical concoction. As opposed to, I think the way most people do it, yeah, Q-tip and be careful. Got it? And then there's another genre of earwax ads that's, get rid of all your earwax, but stop wasting so many resources and filling up landfills with Q-tips, which I guess if you use enough of them, like this person here in the earwax ad has done, you will fill a landfill. But it seems like it'll take an awful long time to fill a landfill with Q-tips. But okay, I can understand cumulatively over a lifetime that perhaps that becomes a problem. So they now have like sort of reusable Q-tip things. You use it, clean your ear out, wash the Q-tip, use it again later. It's really unpleasant. I don't know. I don't think I'm searching anything weird. I guess all I'm really searching out, and the most frequently opened page for me is probably the COVID pages, and I guess that's healthcare, and I don't know. You tell me what's going on. I'd love to know what the algorithm says about these things, because there's so many more interesting things happening that we could be talking about today. And Greg Dworkin will join us to talk about them. Action on the debt ceiling front. You've no doubt seen by now that there is apparently a short-term deal. The deal's in place. I guess the legislation, not yet. But yesterday afternoon, we began seeing reports that Mitch McConnell had, well, it depends on how you look at it. I think a lot of the Democrats in the Senate are portraying it as a cave, that he blinked in the face of the game of chicken that's not really a game that's going on with the federal debt and the national economy and therefore the world economy because of who we are and the role we play and everybody basing everything on the dollar, et cetera, et cetera. But it looks from one perspective like they blinked. They said, we'll agree to, and I think McConnell, the first reports were that in his conference meeting, he was floating the idea of offering a clean, short-term debt ceiling hike. And I guess the idea was do a debt ceiling hike rather than a debt ceiling suspension so that the Democrats in the majority would have to propose a number and pin it on the whole thing, but that they would, anyway, alleviate the pressure of the debt ceiling into, well, at least for a short time. How short? Into December. And it's strategic, and the Republicans think that by kicking the can down the road a little bit and moving the debt ceiling crisis into December, it becomes more of an issue in the midterm elections. It's almost 2022 at that point. Why they didn't kick it directly into 2022, I'm not entirely sure. But it alleviates the immediate pressure. Democrats portraying it as, like I said, as a cave by Republicans. Republicans, I think, basically saying, we get to have this problem all over again in December. This is fine by us. no skin off our nose, and we force the Democrats to pin a number to the debt ceiling, and then we can run that number in ads against them. I don't know if it helps. I don't know if it hurts with their efforts. And I'm not sure how I feel about it from our side. I mean, it alleviates the immediate pressure, which, you always want to do that. You can't not take the deal because of how much is at stake. Though, I also did think that once word broke from the Republican conference meeting that this was acceptable to the Republicans, I thought it might have been interesting for Schumer to run to the floor just to demonstrate something. It would be a great academic experiment. I think politically it doesn't work out. But academically, it might have been interesting to run to the floor and offer the exact same deal and ask unanimous consent for it and watch Republicans object to it. And then immediately afterwards, McConnell would arrive on the floor, offer the exact same deal, and Republicans wouldn't object to it, and it would pass, and you would thereby demonstrate the thorough seriousness with which Republicans were approaching the problem. That if a Republican says, raise the debt ceiling, they'll raise the debt ceiling. If a Democrat says raise the debt ceiling, they won't do it. It's horrible. They object to it. It's tyranny, etc. Except that point would, of course, immediately be lost on anybody, well, probably anybody watching. And certainly if it wasn't immediately lost on people watching, the press would lose it for you as they went ahead and portrayed it as a huge loss for Schumer and Democrats and a personal rebuke, and that only McConnell has the gravitas and popularity inside of the Senate to make something like this happen, and you witnessed it. It only happened when McConnell said it should happen. And that's probably the spin they would have put on it. So you kind of jump out of the way and take what you can get so that the economy doesn't melt down, and then approach the thing again. But for those of you who are excited by the issue and found it interesting and intriguing, I think you'll get another chance in December to do it all over again. Just like yesterday when we spoke with Greg Dworkin, and today we have the chance to do it all over again. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. So I basically agree with what you said, but I'm going to put a little different spin on it just by looking at some of the trade media, which is to say Punchbowl and Politico, for conventional wisdom to see how they're handling this. And I was discussing with one of my Republican friends this morning on Twitter that, basically McConnell did blink. His goal up until yesterday was complete chaos. That's the reports that were coming out. We want chaos. Chaos is good for Republicans in the next election. And Schumer called this bluff and said, well, if you want chaos, what you'll do is you'll throw the U.S. into default, and that's really bad, and it'll cost 6 million jobs, and we'll pin it on you.
Okay.
And some of his caucus got a little squeamish about it.
Good.
But said, okay, fine. If that's what's going on, then I suppose we should, stick with the plan here. And McConnell started talking to, of all people, Sinema and Manchin, feeling them out for how strict and firm they were going to be on there's no such thing as changing filibusters. And Manchin and Sinema said, well, for this, in terms of having the U.S. default, maybe we could do a little carve-out here. And McConnell said, well, maybe sticking with the plan isn't such a good idea, and so we'll back off a little bit. And that's what Democrats meant when they said he blinked, which buys them a little time until December or beyond. It may be beyond, because by then tax revenue comes in, and so that October 17th date isn't as firm if you get more revenue coming in, so maybe it's January.
Okay.
That buys them enough time to work on reconciliation and infrastructure, get it done. And so to Democrats, that was a clear help, a win in a battle, not the war.
Yes. All right. So, clearing that off of the deck so that the rest of these two big bills can be fought about.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the way that they looked at it.
Certainly.
And there's quotes of that, which I'll get to. But when I was talking about this with my Republican friend, he said, well, I'm not even sure what a win means.
Okay.
And I said, well, a win means getting Republicans to negotiate on an actual thing that passes. And maybe somebody should send McConnell a copy of Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill. So, he gets the idea here. And my Republican friend laughed and said, you have a Schoolhouse Rock for reconciliation?
See, he asked. And you said,
I said, okay, that would be good. That would be a very good idea.
Yeah. Right. You made that suggestion the other day. I haven't been able to fit it into lyrics, but, it's a tough
it's a tough one, but worth it. So let me give you a sample.
Syllables.
Punchbowl writes, once the Senate formally ratifies this agreement that Schumer and McConnell came to, or are in the process of coming to, Schumer will get nearly 7 more weeks to work on the multi-trillion-dollar reconciliation package, the crown jewel of President Joe Biden's legislative agenda. But in reality, the deadline's much shorter because this buys him only 2 or 3 weeks to strike a House-Senate deal on a top line, begin drafting the reconciliation package, and they'll be lucky to get it done before the debt war flares up again. And Schumer also gets out of a political box that he and Speaker Pelosi constructed for themselves because McConnell warned for months that Senate Republicans, furious that the Democrats are going to accomplish something, that's my summary, furious over the barrage of expensive new social programs being proposed, would demand the majority party use reconciliation to pass a debt limit. Democrats ignored this. That's the box they put themselves in, according to Punchbowl. And Schumer has yet to figure out how to boost the debt limit in December or January. We've been told it could be delayed a month due to an influx of tax revenue. And Democrats continue to say they won't use reconciliation to do it, so that part's not clear. So according to Punchbowl, they really haven't won because McConnell's still crafty and foxy, and I looked at this. Now they do point out there's some grumbling in the GOP ranks about this strategy, and McConnell gave in even before the Democrats failed to get 60 votes for cloture on the vote yesterday, which Schumer, I guess, delayed because he was having this discussion with McConnell about how to do it differently. So what does McConnell win here? A chance for chaos. That's the way Punchbowl put it. But Politico actually had a slightly different take on it and said basically the Democrats think that McConnell caved. McConnell caved, said Warren. Looks like Mitch McConnell's folding, said Trump. Much of the MSM coverage this morning endorses Warren and Trump's McConnell blinked first narrative.
All right.
Right? With the threat of a default as little as 12 days off, McConnell made a tactical retreat and announced that Republicans would allow Democrats to vote on a short-term extension. Basically, McConnell did blink. The Democrats did win this. You won't hear it in the trade med because they want to paint this as Democrats are always in disarray. McConnell's always crafty, just like he said. But the fact is they did win this battle. They bought themselves some time. They can put stuff together. And by the way, what you're not hearing is a lot of House infighting. I don't hear from Josh Gottheimer. That September 27th date, that was a date firm and certain.
Oh, yeah.
That he was 1,000% sure was going to pass, and then he got cut off at the knees. He's quiet. The House is going to get this done. Manchin and Sinema actually didn't, side with McConnell on this whole filibuster thing, according to these reports. And so things are looking up for the Democrats. It's a tough negotiation. It's not easy. There's a lot of work to do. But as I said the other day, the idea that complex negotiations is somehow always Democrats in disarray is just stupid. That's not what's going on here. It's difficult, but they broke the logjam. Instead of having everything that had to be done by the end of last week, in fact, this got put off, that stuff. Stupid as it is, because we know going back to World War I, there's no reason for it. But nonetheless, they put off that decision for a while. Yeah. And they put off the September 27th hard and fast deadline and said, it's really October 31st. Yeah. And you may say it's kicking the can down the road, which is the favorite thing to say in Washington. But in fact, what it does is give them a couple of weeks breathing room to get stuff done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the road goes somewhere.
Right. And the other side of the coin is that Sinema isn't talking, but she's also not saying bad things. And Manchin, you basically could ignore because he is the classic example of I'll say 2 separate things and you take what you want from that. 1.5 trillion is my top line. Well, I can live with 2.2, but 1.5 trillion is my top line. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It means he's talking to his West Virginia conservative constituency, and like Sinema for her Arizona independence, has to show that they're not party line, follow whatever Pelosi says, because everybody knows it's not Joe Biden who's running this. Nancy Pelosi is doing all of this, So for their constituency, that's how they look at it, and so that's how they position themselves, and that has nothing to do with what sort of deal might actually come out of this. Okay,
yeah, I mean, it was well handled overall, I think, and Manchin, this was good
leave
too.
Sinema alone.
Well, I don't know.
Following her into the bathroom.
Oh, well, don't go in the bathroom just because.
Let them negotiate.
Yeah, well, she's not really great at it, and I did see some interesting observations about her, her style in the last couple of days. Just since she seems to be so interested in putting on the mantle of, assuming the mantle of the John McCain figure here, the reporters were talking amongst themselves in front of all of us on Twitter and saying, for all the comparisons she likes to make to McCain, the thing about McCain was no one was ever frustrated that McCain wouldn't talk to them. The reporters were saying nobody could stop McCain from talking. If you asked him a question, he'd stay there for hours as if there were microphones.
Right. And would often come with barbecue and donuts.
Yeah. And I mean, there was no shortage of information forthcoming from John McCain about what he was thinking, what he was doing, where things were going. And Sinema, whether it's just personal style or she doesn't have an answer, I don't know. Her approach to it is to clam up and to refuse to talk to people, whether reporters or constituents.
I think she's
tough.
Basically an introvert, and McCain was an extrovert.
Well, that ain't gonna work.
You can't expect them to react the same way to the press, who love extroverts and really are very suspicious of introverts.
Yes, and
if you're uncomfortable talking to me, you must have something to hide. Well, maybe I just don't like talking to people.
That could be, certainly, but then it's not a great job for you. And if you put yourself at the center that way and say, I'm the pivot, I'm the key person here on everything. I
want the spotlight on me, and I hate the spotlight. That's not good. And that's my view of Sinema and why she looks so confused. Yeah, well, that's so. But Joe Manchin figured it out. Just say two different things. Yeah.
That's all right.
Just keep talking. I mean, he's always good for an interview. He doesn't say anything of substance.
No. But he says
things. He gives you the impression, and that's all reporters need. They just need the impression. I'm going to write up the vibes.
Yeah.
I'll do the interpretation. Thank you very much. Just give me something to work with here.
Yeah. Well, and that may be that even though he's made no more sense than Sinema, he still gets better press than Sinema does. And, no one follows.
Yeah, he's also a guy.
Right. No one wants to go into men's room.
A white guy at that. A white guy from a red state.
Yeah.
They have diners there.
That helps. Not many, but they do. Yeah. All right. Well, I was only a little disappointed in the whole thing because it looked so exciting for prospects of filibuster reform. So filibuster reform people are upset.
Well, interestingly, filibuster reform threat may have driven this entire thing to come to some sort of temporary resolution.
Yeah, but we want a resolution. But
that just kicks the can down the road.
Yeah, well, it does for that. Right. So for the filibuster reform people, it does. That's how you view it. Well, there'll be another fight later, and maybe we'll move the ball forward a little bit next time we kick a can. There's a can and a ball.
The eternal battle between good and evil is never over. You just, the war isn't over. You just have these battles.
So anyway, comes to the next one, but that's good news. There was movement. The needle did move a little bit, if you're into the theory, and it's a good one, that Republicans and McConnell blinked because it looked like Manchin and or Sinema, and you need them both, but it looked like one of them gave some indication, and that might carry the other one along with them, that, you know what, this is too important. And then they were floating all the weird things, like maybe just for one day we'll have no filibuster, and I guess that made them nervous, because that's a lot to be leaking out of the Democratic caucus.
Right. So the Democratic caucus was clearly getting frustrated with McConnell, called his bluff, and got stuff done, and that's in fact what happened.
We'll take it.
Now, interestingly, this is an E.J. Dionne piece. Thanks to McConnell, even Biden is losing faith in the filibuster. And what he talks about is on late Tuesday, Biden met McConnell's hardball with some hardball of his own, asked by a reporter if Democrats should consider altering the filibuster rules. Biden said, well, I think it's a real possibility.
Okay.
Bang. With 7 words, Biden brought home the profound irrationality of our current governing system. Pretty good. And remember, Biden is an institutionalist and a Senate institutionalist at that. And if you can get him to say under certain circumstances, you got to get rid of the filibuster, or at least consider it, that's movement.
Yes, it was. He's done it before, a long time ago. Everyone forgets. It's one of the first things he did in the Senate was join up with the filibuster reformers. But since then, he's been an institutionalist.
Well, it's my reform. Leave it alone.
Right. Well, it was well played all around, and if you couldn't get enough of it, don't worry, there's more.
Right. There's more. So here's some separate good news on a completely separate front.
Yes.
So, after last week's depressing week, we ought to get some good news. After judges ruling one of Texas' biggest abortion providers will resume abortions up to 18 weeks, a federal judge has blocked enforcement of a Texas abortion ban that bars the procedure after 6 weeks and makes no exceptions for rape or incest. The ruling may not hold, of course. The state of Texas almost immediately appealed the ruling to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans, staunchly conservative. However, in his order, Judge Robert Pittman called the Texas law an unprecedented and aggressive scheme to deprive its citizens of a significant and well-established constitutional right. The problem here for the conservatives is, of course, the courts are just as political as the Congress. We all know that. They pretend it's not. But public sentiment is really clearly against them. And because they're political, they know that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Yeah, it will. Obviously, somebody will appeal, depending upon what they decide. And then, it's going to wind up in the Supreme Court. We all know that. Yeah.
And because it's a political, I'll throw in one extra twist on the political body thing. It is a the court's a political body. It, as you say, it's headquartered, sits in New Orleans, which is outside of the Texas power sphere. And, so all the presidential politics of all this, with Greg Abbott, obviously with his eyes on the prize, and lots of other Republican governors also thinking of getting into the competition, there will be other centers of political gravity prevailing on the Fifth Circuit Court, one from Texas to deliver a win to Abbott and boost his chances, and 10 others from outside of Texas saying, take Abbott out at the knees, hand him an embarrassing loss after promising the world to the anti-abortion faction of the party, and then have it all collapse.
And we'll blame it on unintended consequences. It wasn't us, it was him.
Yeah. He just did it wrong. He was too aggressive. He doesn't know what he's doing on the national front.
Yeah, we had an incremental approach that was working, and this guy just blew it.
40 years. But yeah, well, so different centers of political gravity come to all have seats on the Fifth Circuit.
Right. So well, the other side of that political coin, this is Washington Monthly. Julie Roden-Zebrak writing, Dear women, we still need you to defeat Trumpism. That Women's March last weekend was pretty large. How Democrats can rev up the core constituency that voted them back into power, even without a certain someone on the ballot. And, this if you want to make the Fifth Circuit the center of political discussion, that's not going to help Republicans at the ballot box.
Yeah, okay.
You want your opponents to be dispirited and depressed, not angry and ready to march.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, since we're talking about different spheres of power here, here's a I just thought this fit right in with Kagro in the morning, and I thought you'd find it fascinating. You've been looking at it a little bit, but this is Charlie Pierce in Esquire writing about Idaho, right? John's an Idaho expert.
Yeah.
Idaho's palace coup is like Game of Thrones if it were produced by OAN.
Yeah. Well, it's second palace coup. God.
So Republican Governor Brad Little decides to go to the southern border so he could criticize the president on TV. Right. And while he's gone, the lieutenant governor tries to send Idaho National Guard units to the border. And the governor countermanded that and said, that's political posturing. You're trying to run for my job. We won't have that.
Yeah.
And he's down at the border. Remember, Idaho does not have a border with Mexico. And he's yelling at the lieutenant governor for political posturing.
Yeah. Right.
Undaunted, McGeechan, who's the lieutenant governor, proceeded to announce that she was reversing the admittedly tepid measures Little had enacted to deal with the pandemic. Mm-hmm. That was when we first got to know her. And apparently, McGeechan is lighting up to run against Little the next time around, Charlie Pierce writes. And the current grenade launching is not the first time the two have clashed. McGeechan tried the same stunt back in May. She banned mask mandates while Little was out of town. She cobbled together a task force to fight indoctrination in Idaho public schools. She tried to stonewall public records requests until a judge ordered her to release documents related to that task force. She capped things off by requesting that the costs related to her fight be covered by public money and Republican politics in a shot glass right there. Eventually, they eat their own.
It was really incredible.
If you're eating your own, that's Fifth Circuit Court trying to decide what to do with Greg Abbott's time bomb.
Yes.
Nuclear option.
Right.
Neutron bomb, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and I think I did see somebody writing about that and picked up on our debate on the what to call it the other day. But yeah, the Idaho thing, what I can't understand is like that they went through this once before, and I don't know. I mean, I guess the governor can't just not. it would be a huge win for the lieutenant governor if he just gave up on leaving the state for big photo ops. But I can't believe that they haven't figured out a way. He didn't leave behind some sort of declaration like, by the way, while I'm gone, I have a phone. The lieutenant governor isn't in charge. Don't listen to her about anything. But also great choice from her, just in terms of one of the many things that she did, I thought which was hilarious, was the idea of dispatching the very popular idea among crazy Republican governors to dispatch your National Guard to the border.
To some other state.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense or anything, but what...
Didn't ask that state. We'll just invade them.
Right.
Just show up.
What I thought
because every state loves invading armies from somewhere else without asking.
Jade Helm. It's fantastic. I thought
now
they
we
hated
expect
that
to be
down
billeted
Texas.
and fed, and I'm sure there's no issue with that. And by the way, Texas, you pay for it.
What I found interesting about it was, so many other governors had done it, and so it was sort of a standard play at that point. But everybody rolls their eyes at it, and how dumb is that? But in this case, it was interesting because she said, I'm sending them to the border. And, what's the governor going to say? Going to the border? That's stupid. That's just a stunt. Why would anybody go to the... Where am I again? Oh, I'm at the border. Oh.
No, that was a great move.
Got me. Yeah, that was one of the more brilliant reasons for dispatching them for otherwise no reason. I like that one a lot.
That's a ridiculous political stunt. We would never do that. I'm sending my troops to South Dakota to bolster Christie Nome so they don't get invaded.
They should. I mean, if the South Dakota troops, that's an idea. If they went
what
to
what are you
border,
doing? Playing Brisk?
Right.
You're going to take Irkutsk next? I mean, what are you doing exactly?
They ought to try it, though. I mean, what happens if a neighboring state sends its troops, its National Guard troops to the border? Maybe you should send your National Guard troops there and try and take over that state.
Yeah, just annex them.
There's extra tax
we'll
base,
take the
don't you want
revenue
it?
and we'll take the pillage.
Think about how you could gerrymander your legislature if you could just absorb South Dakota into Idaho, if that's possible. I don't think so. Anyway, interesting, good play, and get your act together, Idaho. Jeez.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin still here. We continue on. Something. I'm in disarray, I guess, because I'm Democratic.
Well, you're a Democrat.
Yeah.
You must be.
So, because I'm in disarray, I don't know what's coming next.
So we're going to talk just briefly about the Senate Judiciary Report. Releases a 394-page staff report entitled Subverting Justice, How the Former President and His Allies Pressured DOJ to Overturn the 2020 Election. What's new here, some details about Jeffrey Clark. This comes from interviews, previously unreleased transcripts of the committee's closed-door interviews with Jeff Rosen, Richard Donahue, and B.J. Pack, former U.S. attorney. These witnesses cooperated and talked about basically how Jeffrey Clark, who's a bad guy, was putting pressure on Rosen to cooperate with Trump. And Clark promised, I guess, people in justice that he, Clark, the Trump appointee, would not take acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen's job, promised not to take his job if he'd only cooperate with Trump. And the report recommends that the distance between Department of Justice and the White House be strengthened, and the D.C. bar should take a look at Jeffrey Clark's actions. But I think the more important thing is they also identify Mark Meadows as another person putting pressure on. And this is the basis for some of the subpoenas that the January 6th committee is putting out in terms of wanting to speak to these folks. Now, they've already said they're not going to comply, and Trump is saying it's executive privilege, and Biden is saying, you don't get to do that. I get to do that. You are not president. And so that's where that stands, and that's why that's interesting.
It is. And, all right, well, we'll see how that shakes out. Today, I think, is the deadline for their compliance, but I think they've already signaled pretty clearly that they won't. And I guess, so today is the day that they get to say, well, it didn't happen, and I don't know whether today or tomorrow or next week is when the committee meets to say, now what do we do
now
about
our
it?
next step.
Yeah.
The New York Times story, a Senate panel fleshed out how Donald Trump pursued his plan to install a loyalist as acting attorney general to pursue unfounded reports of fraud. That puts Jeffrey Clark in the center. And so everybody now knows that Trump was trying to subvert the election even before January 6th. And so, that's all part and parcel of how this all plays out. So that's of interest. How do you cover that? Well, Neiman Reports has an interesting piece here. In an era of misinformation and tracking technology, long-held journalism norms are shifting. Newsrooms are rethinking traditional ideas of neutrality, the use of invasive tracking data and source relationships with law enforcement. That is to say, maybe it's not a good idea to take everything that the cops tell you on face value. We need these 10 tanks in this small town of 75 people.
Oh, right. Tracking technology. Well, okay.
So they talk about it from the point of view of BuzzFeed News. In the wake of the insurrection, BuzzFeed News reported on how rioters had planned the attack online, and part of that reporting drew from message boards. In the following days, the newsroom also reported on how Stop the Steal flourished on Facebook.
Yeah.
But
is that bad?
Here's the issue. Do you cover the news of these boards in a way that pushes people to go look at them and drive them traffic? BuzzFeed News didn't link to message boards or uncritically quote from the posts. The point was not to draw people to a message board like that. So that's the kind of calculation that news media has to make in terms of, well, we're just going to say this because it's there. And we're not going to, we're all going to be NPR. Or we're going to simply say there was an insurrection on January 6th and both sides says the other side was at fault.
Yes. And you can read them here.
BuzzFeed News avoids stories if the goal is simply debunking. You don't want to expose people who haven't already seen the lie to the lie just for the sake of exposing it. Mm-hmm. It was easier with Trump. You had to cover him because he said it and he's president. But there's a growing recognition both among journalists and consumers of news that some journalistic conventions need to be reexamined. The traditional notion of neutrality is one of them. Jay Rosen quoted here, to portray an asymmetric situation as both sides is a form of distortion. So what choices will journalists make with regards to covering misinformation and lies and covering crime and policing post-George Floyd? And how does a dangerous reporting climate factor into that, right? If you keep getting threatened, what happens then? So, for example, the Cleveland Plain Dealer said, we're not covering whatever Josh Hawley says just because he says it.
That's good. Well, I mean,
right. Editor Chris Quinn stated the paper would ignore false statements from U.S. Senate candidate Josh Mandel, that the paper, not Josh Hawley, Josh Mandel here.
The other Josh, right. Yes.
That the paper believed were ploys for attention. Mandel has promoted conspiracy theories that the 2020 election was stolen, pushing outright false claims by politicians only serves the politician's agenda, and they're not going to be complicit.
Okay.
They want to be debunked. They want to be covered. We're not doing it.
Can I get Howie Mandel on the ballot up there to see if we can split the vote for him?
And Kiki Freeman, too. We'll get them all up there. The pitfalls of both sidesism are being probed anew in coverage issues like legislation to restrict voting in states like Georgia and Texas. Should they be voter suppression laws or election integrity laws? So BuzzFeed News is going to do it as voting restrictions. The Washington Post does it as well. New York Times refers to them as voting laws because it's the New York Times and they're awful. In an explainer piece on the Georgia bill, the paper stated in the lead paragraph that the bill serves to create restrictions and complications. So call it the Voting Restriction and Complication Law. Act
of 19, right.
Well, but that's what it is.
Yeah, why not?
And they talk about there aren't hard lines. You got to make judgment calls. And then also, we're more traceable than ever before. Whenever we take our smartphones, our movements are logged. The problem was tackled head-on by New York Times opinion writers Charlie Warzel, who since moved to his own newsletter at Substack, and Stu Thompson, who revealed that a source had shared location data tracing thousands of people to the Capitol at the time of the January 6th insurrection. They penned the piece as a criticism of surveillance and explored the unreliability of data, noting it was impossible to verify whether the precise location was in fact correct. So should journalism use that data to help write reports? That's what they mean about tracking.
I see, yeah.
Right, if it's personal data and they get a hold of that, how do you use that? The smartphone data from the insurrection ups the ante for journalists. Smartphone users were tracked as they engage in potentially illegal activity. Right, and the data could easily be abused. And when is it, crossing the line to use it? And then they go on to talk about things like, calling police violence for what it is. So it's an interesting piece on, journalists wrestling with this. But at the same time, my friend Adam Bass, a young journalist from Massachusetts, had a newsletter that he talked about a slightly different problem the media has, what we've learned from D.C. media and why it's been so frustrating, and goes on to say, the reality is that many Americans don't pay attention to legislative whatchamacallits, parliamentarian doodads. That's what you cover, right?
Yes.
You're an expert on parliamentarian doodads.
Honestly.
Who knew?
Yeah.
Right? But that's what it's called.
Okay.
So,
Nuclear
in fact,
doodads.
many of them don't pay attention to what's going on in D.C. at all. Most of them are thinking about their own personal lives and the lives of their local communities. Fair enough. If you live in a small town in Iowa or a big city in California, I don't think you have much input in D.C. anyway. And yet, the media influence of D.C. is inescapable like a black hole. Most media center around the Acela corridor between New York and D.C. That's one part of America, but it takes up almost all of the news stories. And it's not to say those stories are bad. He names some great reporters he likes to follow. But we don't really have a civics program in the U.S. because we don't do Schoolhouse Rock. So it's not surprising that many Americans don't really care or know about what the debt ceiling is, or that there's a lack of a need to change Senate rules. But the D.C. media, thanks to its strong influence, pushes a narrative that this is important and is befuddled why people aren't freaking out. Well, how can you be shocked if nobody's listening? That's my biggest gripe. The fact that the Acela corridor has this massive black hole of influence. It's frustrating. Many students who went to summer classes at BU with me said they see working in D.C. or New York as the only option. And that's just sad. You really need to get reporters out where other news is happening. If they're not there, they don't cover it. And so you don't know what's going on. But it's important. Madison Cawthorn may hate Congress and want to run for governor. That's the kind of stuff local people are covering, and it's important and it's interesting, and it's not the Acela corridor. Yeah. Unless you think it's tangentially because Cawthorn happens to be in D.C. at the moment, and that's the only reason why you know who he is.
Well, I don't know. I don't know who's to blame for the fact that when they do venture outside of the corridor, they end up at diners. But maybe they could work on that.
Yep, and that's part of the issue too.
It's the reporter's fault or your fault for not building something more attractive than a diner.
Right. And then finally, in my relatively short piece today, Joe Biden, a convert to mandates, is going to make the economic case for shots today.
A convert to
We talked yesterday about the fact that Biden is pushing boosters.
Yes.
But and that's because the public sort of gets why they're doing it. It's to prevent infection, whereas the public health people are concentrated on preventing the hospitals from collapsing. But today he's going to take a slightly different tack and say, you know what? Mandates, which I really didn't want to do, but you people didn't act like grown-ups, and so now I have to because I'm your dad. I'm your Uncle Joe, and sometimes Uncle Joe has to give you some tough love. But they work.
Yeah.
And you're going to do them.
That raises an interesting issue just on the whole, the overarching framing issue and the daddy party and the whole thing that the Republicans thought they had going for them. We didn't think about the possibility of being an uncle to all this. Right.
You're a tyrant. I'm not. I'm an uncle, not a dad.
Right.
Forcing people to do something they don't want to do is rarely a winning political strategy, but this isn't from an AP article, but with the majority of the country already vaccinated, with industry on his side, Biden has emerged as an unlikely advocate of browbeating tactics to drive vaccinations. So he's going to give a speech today in Chicago about it.
Yeah.
This is at a company that's going to agree to mandates. This is taking action weeks ahead of a forthcoming rule by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. We talked about this 6 months ago, that OSHA had the power to do this.
Yeah.
It's a safety issue, and so you got to make sure that you're covered so that your place is safe. Biden's going to encourage other businesses to follow suit by taking action ahead of the OSHA rule, and to go even further by requiring shots for their employees without offering a test out option. Right now, it's like, if you don't get it, then you have to test. It's like, I remember flu shots at my hospital some years ago, where we helped with discussion with the union and cooperation from them, a rule that basically said you had to have a shot to be on the premises. But if you didn't, then you had to wear a mask the entire time that you were here. This was 6 years ago. So you had your out, and you could tell who was vaccinated and who was not, because those are the ones wearing the masks.
Yeah.
And the hospital had a record. You're an employee, so we know whether you got your shot or not. And if you didn't, you have to wear your mask. And so a few people wore masks, but most people got vaccinated. Biden's also set to meet with the CEO of UA, United Airlines, Scott Kirby, whose company successfully implemented a vaccine mandate. And Lawrence Gostin, a public health expert at Georgetown University's law school, says Biden's mandates have worked spectacularly well.
Okay.
All you people who said the mandates wouldn't work. He added that the president's rules have also had a modeling effect for city, states, and businesses. Think California and their school system. Think New York and their school system for teachers. That's what the White House intended. And so it's working. And Biden's going to build on that today. So, yeah, you can discuss that. But the fact of the matter is mandates do work. We had all those companies. We read you a list last week of all the companies who had employees leaving, all three of them.
Yeah.
With 25,000 employees. And 3 decided not to, and they're going to sue, and they'll lose. And, the vast majority, most companies who are doing this have less than 1% of their employees leaving. Yeah. And that was always going to be the case. I remember by name who those were at my hospital who left. And, they were fans of alternative medicine, let's just say.
Yes, okay.
And, fine. That's your choice. Bye.
Yeah, I guess so. Just don't choose it around here. That's all. Well, interesting, and very much like the vaccines themselves, where some people say the vaccines don't work. Somebody who got vaccinated got COVID, right? Well, again, it wasn't meant to be the 100% cure-all for everything COVID-related. It was just supposed to help us keep the numbers down in the hospital and keep people from dying, and in that sense, it's working. Same thing with the mandates. There are still people who defy them. There are still people who won't get the shot, but considerably less than those who said they wouldn't at the beginning, and now they are. And
right.
99% of them are
simple and complex messaging.
Yes.
All right. You want to be accurate. You don't want to be in the situation where you're telling people inaccurate things. But it's interesting that as vaccine hesitancy drops, partially due to mandates, the COVID wave is fading.
Yes.
Is that cause and effect? Probably not. But still, if you're looking at we're going in the right direction, then you can say those two things together in the same sentence, and you draw your own conclusion.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm wondering about whether it's fading in. Certainly,
not in Alaska yet, but it's no question. It's, compared to where the peak was, just look at Worldometers, your favorite place, or any of the other sites that track this, and less cases.
Yeah, largely the overall numbers going down in a lot of places, leveling off and finally heading back downward, just like you predicted was going to be the case. I think even in places where they are. Holdouts against vaccination and masking, the places that blew up over the late summer and, mid and late summer down south have reached the point where, the virus seems to have consumed everybody that it could immediately, and now it's scrounging around for whatever's left. But in the meantime, if you follow the maps, the big numbers have moved up north again, where people are starting to move indoors again because the weather is cold. The northern tier of the country now is lit up in red on the maps the way the south was before.
Well, I think what's going to happen,
that happened last year
my
too.
guess is that the next wave that comes isn't going to be nearly as big as the last one. And that's partially due to the number of people vaccinated, partially due to the number of people who have already gotten sick. Again, one of the things that the CDC and other experts, FDA, really have to cover is what do you do with the people who have already been sick?
Yes. Right.
Where do they stand on vaccine boosters or vaccinations? Yes, we recommend them, but do they need one? Do they need two? How do we do that? What's the real story? What's the data? And almost no discussion on that because I don't think they know. But it's okay to say we don't know. And so there was just an op-ed the other day in the New York Times from a Johns Hopkins public health person saying it's not fair to leave the people who got sick out of this whole discussion. That's partly driving why numbers are dropping in the South because it burned through everybody who could get sick.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what do you do with them then? You know, the problem with that approach, of course, is that more people die. But if you're talking about, okay, but what comes next for those who survived, it's an important discussion.
It is an important discussion. It would be a good idea to have an idea before the next variant that doesn't care whether you had it or not comes along.
You know, you are more likely to get reinfected if you've been naturally immunized as opposed to the vaccine with a booster. But that's another story for another day. This piece I'm looking at right now is just contributing to the protection. Teen Vogue, of all places, which is actually pretty aggressive about covering politics these days, and often has better stories than the New York Times. These teens got the COVID vaccine despite hesitant parents. It is Teen Vogue, so it's okay to talk about teens.
Yeah, I guess, right?
And they're talking about how, well, a 16-year-old went to the pediatrician for an unrelated issue, and the doc said, you're eligible for the vaccine. And she made an appointment and got it.
Okay.
Right? Well, and despite rising COVID infections in young people, not every teen's parents were as supportive as hers. And then they talk about young people fighting with their families about the vaccine and how they go about, getting it done. Sometimes they can convince the parents.
Yeah.
They think that part of the reason they consented was because they saw the vaccine hadn't negatively affected her older brother, this one says. Both parents went with her when she got vaccinated. And then both of her parents are essential workers, but they're not vaccinated. And they'll work on the parents, an old story.
Yeah.
Teens try to talk the parents into coming along to the 21st century. And then there's other folks who, had a little bit more difficulty. And one person says Aaron Parsa founded Teens for Vaccines in 2019 during a measles outbreak when he was 12 years old. He describes the organization as a youth collective and ambassadors who believe in the life-saving powers of vaccine. He says there's a deep mental health component to the inability to get vaccinated. Teens are struggling because they can't protect themselves and their loved ones, and they live in fear. And so this helps them do it. I mean, there's all sorts of grassroots sort of ways to do it. Again, it's not just Fauci and Biden politicians telling you what to do or experts from CDC or NIH. It's that, you have to hear it from people you know. And Facebook going down is probably an overall blessing for the United States.
Yes, right. See if we can get it to happen again.
Well, we'll see. Okay. But I'm not suggesting that they, should be hanged.
Right. Leave that to me.
But it's helpful in terms of fighting disinformation because they're not very good at it.
Yeah, they're not very good at.
Still, they say these teens try not to default to anger about people who refuse to get vaccinated.
Try.
I think it's worth recognizing people are really scared, and I'm not the only one who's scared. Sometimes we have to be brave. I would just ask people to step out of their comfort zone because I have to be uncomfortable so you can be uncomfortable too. So that's how the article concludes. So it's good words to the wise about speaking to people who don't necessarily want to get vaccinated.
Wear a mask when you do.
Right. And then another media piece that was floating around. I don't know if you want to comment on it. One American News, the right-wing cable network that peddled 2020 election conspiracies, gets nearly all their funding from AT&T.
Yes. A lot of talk about that. I put the article away. I'm afraid to dive into it just because it looks huge. And I think in the end we'll say, so AT&T, yeah? Yeah. All right. What did I read all this stuff for? Well, don't know exactly how to deal with it. I am curious about exactly how that went. And I mean, it wasn't like AT&T just said, let's just take a large chunk of our corporate money and just do this thing with it. There's some intermediaries and some business thinking behind some of it.
Well, Reuters covers it if you're interested.
I guess I really do want to kind of figure it out because it is a big story. And
yeah, maybe for tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Give
it's
yourself
a Good Friday
a little
story. Time. We can digest it and see how much of it really belongs on the air. Okay.
And,
None of
that's
OAN
it.
does.
I'm done.
All right, I can accept that.
You're on your own. I'm done for the week. See you Monday.
All right, I give up. It's very depressing. Okay, well,
We're
we'll
making
hold out
progress.
for the weekend. Yeah, we're getting there towards the end of the week. We'll go over all the filibuster stuff again. Tomorrow's big plan is Ellie Zupnik from the Fix Our Senate or Fix what I can't remember whether we're on Fix Our Senate or Fix the Senate is our current incarnation of it, and I'll remind myself of that before we start tomorrow. But so we'll do a big filibuster, needle movement, can kicking wrap up tomorrow, and then maybe if necessary, a walk down the AT&T lane. If we don't do it today, if I don't go back on my word and scan it during the next break and say, I think I can manage this. But okay, I think that's a good summary, Greg. We got a taste of everything. Have we left anything out? Was there any major stories that we forgot? You can leave them on the doorstep.
None that I know of, but hey,
case.
you got another hour to figure out if there's
Right.
other things that happened that are worth talking about.
We'll figure it all out.
But you know what? That's your problem, not my problem.
Right.
I'll see you Monday.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Greg. Take care. And we now cast our eyes around looking for something else here. Let's.
Oh, and Abby says hi.
Oh, okay. Well,
I hear her barking
hello.
outside.
I should
I'll
have.
go get her. Take care.
Okay, you do the same. I should get some old tape of Abby barking and play it to her. I wonder if she would be able to hear it leak out of Greg's headphones. Or maybe we could put the headphones on her and play herself bark. Would that be terribly confusing to a dog? Might drive her crazy. Might be a bad idea overall. So how big is that AT&T story? I mean, it looked huge. I didn't scan it, but it was the full page graphic that pops up when you click on the story, and it's not, it immediately appears visually different from a regular short-ish Reuters story. Reuters investigates Trump TV, the AT&T connection. Huge graphic. How AT&T helped build far-right One America News. And the only way I can see how big it is by scrolling and seeing how large the little progress bar is on the side. If it's really teeny tiny, you got a couple hundred pages to go through. It's not that bad, and a lot of it is taken up with pictures. I am a little curious. That'll leave us without a plan immediately for tomorrow, but, I bet it could be pretty good. And then we could dig around in the rest of Pocket and find even more obscure stories for a Friday, which is kind of a Good Friday thing. Not Good Friday. I make that mistake every time. All right, let's see. I'll tell you what. We'll cast around on some of the other stories since I think you know all you need to know. AT&T, unhappy with you. Hard company to boycott if you are a customer, and, easy to avoid them if you're not. There's no reason to go over but AT&T is one of those tough deals because I think a lot of the money came from out of the DirecTV vertical. They bought DirecTV some time ago, and I am actually very interested in the details of it. But I mean, if you're a DirecTV subscriber, then it's sometimes difficult to switch. Although I have been a DirecTV subscriber for some time and been thinking about terminating that. Originally, we chose DirecTV because they had that great NFL package, and you could watch all the, you pay the extra fee and get all the games from around the country. And then I sort of lost interest in what was going on in the NFL anyway, and the prices kept going up and up and up, and eventually we just said, to hell with it. Not watching that many games anymore anyway, and that's that. And then after that, there was really no reason to stick with AT&T and the DirecTV package, although I did for a while also have AT&T cell phone service, and there you started to see them put together some package deals, and then we switched anyway because the AT&T reception around here was actually pretty terrible. We thought we'd do better with another company, and it turns out it's not that much better anyway. So, but what are your choices, right? We'll throw AT&T and DirecTV over for what? Another one of the cable giants that also does crappy things with its money. So, it's sometimes difficult to avoid. You know how it is with corporate America. I probably don't have to describe it to you. All right. Well, I am very interested in it, and maybe we'll come back over to that perhaps after the break. Instead, for the one story or so that I can squeeze in headline-wise, prior to the break, more problems with the lunatics in America, QAnon types and COVID conspiracy types. They're graduating to all the things that we worried they would eventually get around to. In addition to browbeating people, public officials, they're now protesting outside of schools and stalking parents who are walking their elementary school kids home and shouting at them that they're poisoning them with the vaccine, or that they're using very unfortunate and abusive language and saying that the vaccine is like raping a child, they actually say, which is actually a fairly disgusting thing to be shouting out while you're actually walking your young kids home, or that masks are child abuse, and it's really awful what's surfacing video-wise from around the country. And now the more extreme example, I'll let you know anyway. From the Baltimore Sun, their headline, Maryland man allegedly, and he did really do it, fatally shot his pharmacist brother, for, quote, killing people with the vaccine, with the COVID vaccine, court records show. Essentially, yeah, the guy, apparently told his mom that he needed to do something to stop his brother, who was a pharmacist, and he's murdering people with this vaccine. It's crazy. I must do something. And mom immediately calls the police and says she's worried about her son and maybe he's mentally imbalanced. And he was. And he apparently, by the way, goes next door and murders the neighbor so that he can steal her car to drive to his brother's house, where I don't know whether he forces his way in or not, but he ends up shooting and killing his brother and his brother's wife in their bedroom, and then fleeing to West Virginia, which I guess is, in the minds of some of these crazies, a safe haven for lunatics to go run off to. That's not a good look for West Virginia, but it couldn't get any worse. But I think you probably should have guessed that it was an inevitability with the level of vitriol and the kind of things that people are being subjected to online. I don't know how you come to any other conclusion once you've bought into the conspiracy theory thinking and craziness of legitimate scientific COVID response somehow being evil. Well, yeah, I don't know. And once you convince yourself that pharmacists are doing the wrong thing, maybe the fact that he's your brother doesn't matter. It's awful. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, just sort of sorting through Pocket and seeing what other stories might be waiting in the wings and necessary for additional attention. And some of these things are, here's something of some interest. I thought the tweet was interesting. Eli Rosenberg, reporter for Washington Post, a labor reporter at the Washington Post. I don't know if he pronounces his name Eli, like Eli does from our Fix the Senate campaign, but I think not. Perhaps Eli Rosenberg. We'll find out if we ever interview him. But Republicans in Arkansas who ended unemployment benefits early this summer. Remember the cutting off the unemployment benefits because we got to have people come back to work and work in this dangerous COVID environment where we're not vaccinating anybody and we don't believe in masks down here in Arkansas. Force everybody back to work by cutting off the unemployment benefits. And then it didn't work, right? Well, these Republicans who ended unemployment benefits early this summer are now trying to create unemployment payment system for people who have been fired from their jobs for refusing vaccine mandates. Now, all of a sudden, paying them additional benefits seems like a good idea. Isn't that interesting? The article that is linked didn't immediately make it obvious where that part of the reporting was, but it looks like it's not too long. We can read through it, and we'll learn some other things along the way. I was a little thrown by the headline. Instead of redistricting, what? Redistricting? Instead of redistricting, Arkansas lawmakers attack Biden's vaccine mandates. Daniel Breen reporting for UALR Public Radio. Okay, so University of Arkansas at Little Rock station, an NPR station. Got it? Okay. Now we understand the source. But I guess the legislature was scheduled to be working on redistricting, controversial enough, but instead they were spending their time, of course, grandstanding and attacking vaccine mandates, because that's what national Republicans are doing, and we wish we were national Republicans. So we're going to cosplay as national Republicans, even though we're state Republicans and should be paying attention to the state's business. In an extended legislative session intended to focus on redrawing Arkansas's 4 U.S. congressional districts, lawmakers have instead set their sights on COVID-19 vaccines, because duh. Members of the Arkansas House and Senate have debated numerous proposals aimed at rolling back parts of President Joe Biden's new vaccine mandates for private businesses. The slate of Republican-backed bills have had varying degrees of success. The most successful so far has been Senate Bill 739, sponsored by Republican Senator Kim Hammer, is probably the pronunciation, of Benton, after successfully passing out of... Yeah, that's funny. After successfully passing out... clunk. No. After successfully passing out of a House committee Tuesday, it's very awkward, it now faces a vote in the full House before going to the governor. The proposal would require employers who mandate vaccines to provide an exemption process for people not choosing to get vaccinated. That should be, I think, choosing not to get vaccinated. That could include weekly coronavirus testing or twice yearly testing for immunity from the virus. Speaking before House Public Health, Welfare, and Labor Committee, the House Committee, on Tuesday, Matt Gilmore with the Arkansas Department of Health said that may not be frequent enough to ensure workers aren't inadvertently spreading COVID-19. Not weekly testing, nor, of course, I don't think this makes any sense at all, twice yearly testing for immunity from the virus. I guess antibody treatments, that's not the same thing as necessarily as immunity from the virus, of course. We don't really know, as far as the time frame, as to what length of immunity is with the virus. Wow. I think you get the idea, though, hopefully. Looking at about 90 days, so every 3 months is what we looked at that, Gilmore said. Oy. We appreciate what the bill is trying to do in some ways, but I think there's lots of things that need to be answered and fleshed out. Clearly true. Under the proposal, the cost of testing would fall on the employee if federal or state funds are not available. The bill would also sunset in 2023 if, quote, no further action is required, i.e. if the virus magically goes away. One of the more hotly debated bills in the session is Senate Bill 732, which ultimately failed before the same committee on Tuesday. That legislation, sponsored by Senator Blake Johnson of Corning, well, it failed, so Blake Johnson, a failure, would have provided unemployment benefits to people fired for not complying with a COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Unlike similar proposals, unemployment payments under Johnson's bill would be funded by the federal government, specifically the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, instead of the state's traditional unemployment insurance trust fund. But state finance officials have said rules prevent those funds from being used for that purpose. Okay, good. Speaking before the committee, Arkansas Commerce Secretary Mike Preston said those payments would then have to come from the trust fund, which would in turn raise costs for businesses. Oh. Well, that's why it failed, I guess. As long as they thought they could steal federal money to do it, they were willing to try. The maximum unemployment insurance benefit that someone could realize is $7,216. Typically, an average claim is less, about half that, about $3,500. So if roughly 1% of our workforce is impacted on that, that's 14,000 people, Preston said. That's a range of anywhere from $49 million to $101 million impact if you're looking at unemployment insurance trust fund. So they ran away from that one. While all vaccine-related bills this session have faced nearly uniform Democratic opposition, Johnson's SB 732 actually caused a split among conservatives in the legislature. Oh, that's interesting. So it put Republicans in disarray. I see. Speaking Monday from the Senate floor, Senator Jim Hendren, an independent from, well, I don't know how they pronounce it, Gravette. You never know how people in Arkansas are going to pronounce this. Gravette, which brings me to another story. Got to turn back on this one. Anyway, Hendren scolded Johnson for the lack of solid funding. I think one of the cruelest things we can do is give people the idea that they're going to get taken care of if they make the decision under this legislation to leave their job, well, to get fired from their job. And we know full well that there's no federal funds that are allocated for that. You've made promises that you know are unkeepable. That's bad. It says what it says, Johnson responded. That's a good argument. Arguing numerous other bills passed by the legislature do not include definite funding sources. Oh my, an unfunded mandate fight. Nice. Senator, a no pay for this, and they're for it, huh? That's so weird about Republicans. Senator Jonathan Dismang, I don't know, from, again, another one of these, BB, maybe, B-E-E-B-E. Beeb, B-B, B-E-E-B, I don't know. Well, he spoke against another part of the bill that would allow workers to opt out of vaccine mandates for religious, philosophical, or health reasons. Just any reason, basically. At the end of the day, we all have the right to choose whether or not we work somewhere. That's true. And if our beliefs agree with those of our employer. If we don't, then we leave. We find another job. This man said, wait a minute, what's he he's arguing against his own bill? What this bill is saying is that if the employer who owns the property, who owns the business, who put up the capital, if they have a disagreement, that employee's right trumps that. Oh, okay, that's right. He's attacking the bill. Right. Good point. Okay, well, he's at least being consistent. I got turned around for just a second on that one. The raft of legislation comes weeks after President Joe Biden announced sweeping new mandates requiring government workers and employees of large businesses to be vaccinated against COVID-19. You know that. While some of Arkansas's largest businesses like Walmart and Tyson Food have already instituted mandates of their own, Republican lawmakers and members of the public have said the mandates encroach on individual liberties. Yeah, well, too bad. This is a corporate state. Single mother Ashley Vance criticized lawmakers who were unsupportive of SB 732 in a committee meeting Friday. I work 12-hour shifts in a plant in Sheridan, Arkansas, and they have told me if I do not receive this vaccination, I will be fired. I will be terminated. Yeah. How can you decide for me what's right for me when you're not being threatened? When you're not being threatened, I guess is what she means. When your job's not being threatened. When your family is not being threatened. I don't know, but we did decide, so goodbye. I mean, it's the ultimate answer. Lawmakers have been meeting since last Wednesday following an extended summer recess in a session intended primarily to address congressional redistricting, but the leaders of the Arkansas House and Senate have ruled lawmakers can take up measures related to COVID-19 vaccinations, leading to the current political showdown. Maybe that was a bad ruling. While lawmakers have considered some redistricting bills, a number of other bills aimed at rolling back vaccine mandates continue to move through the legislature. At least one, SB 739, could gain final approval as soon as this week. Okay. So we're up to speed on what's happening in the Arkansas legislature. This poor lady is afraid of being fired and would like someone to create a safe space for her because she's so conservative. So that's too bad. I don't think that's going to work out. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting note on what's happening in one of the other various states. There was, of course, the Idaho situation that Greg brought up. And, probably a very entertaining telling of the tale is the one that he cited from Charles Pierce in Esquire magazine. And there's a newspaper article from the Idaho Statesman that gives the sort of the blander, just facts kind of discussion anyway, although whether or not they have any more of the political nuance, I have yet to see. And I would assume, it being a local story, they covered a little differently. I'm just surprised that this thing keeps happening and this lieutenant governor keeps doing this and nobody can figure out a way to stop her from doing it. But it was the governor's decision to leave the state for no particular reason. As we know, he went down to the border, and I guess it was a big event. The governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, I think, organized this event, and I don't know whether he specifically invited everybody, but I think there was something like 9 Republican governors. Let me find the article. or actually, if I scroll back, I can, I'll look for the article on it first. Let's see. I saw it yesterday. There was a press release from Greg Abbott, is what I was reading, that proudly listed all the other officials who had showed up. But I did see a great tweet yesterday where somebody took the photo of these governors arrayed behind Greg Abbott and pointing out that, of course, none of them were actually from border states. Now, who was there? I have to rely. I can't identify everybody by their photo. I don't know them well enough. There's a few of them I recognize. But Greg Abbott tells us that Arizona Governor Doug Ducey was there, and it's a border state at least. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, right? Idaho Governor Brad Little. So there's the answer, if you didn't remember his name. And that's where the story started. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. Montana Governor Greg Gianforte, the guy who body slammed the reporter. Don't forget that. Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt. Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon. And then a bunch of Texas state officials are arrayed there for the picture as well. I think DeWine is the only one that I could identify by a photo. But, the recount was tweeting this photo around with little, call-outs on who it was standing behind them. There's the first one I recognize is Mike DeWine, but each one of them labeled, not a border state, wrong border. I guess we're talking about northern tier people who have borders with Canada, and then 1, 2, 3 governors called out as 0 for 3 in states on the border, still not a border state, and also wrong border. So all these governors put themselves down in Texas for what is essentially a photo op. And a little crazy and a little brilliant for the lieutenant governor up there in Idaho. One, to make trouble again, making it obvious that every time that Little leaves the state, she's going to try and do something like this, which will, hamper his ability to go gallivanting around the country. Really, all lieutenant governors should do this. Keep your governor in your state, especially if he's going to, for one thing, the opposite border to do nothing about a thing that isn't the problem with a guy who really doesn't want him to get any actual attention for doing it anyway, because he intends to beat him in the Republican primary for president later on. Okay, let's see. Other items that I wanted to share with you. I should have discussed this one with Greg, and maybe we'll get around to it on Monday, or maybe it's just old news. But I wanted to make sure that it got mentioned, just because it's a COVID thing, and we like to keep up with the latest practices. The Hill is not where I would ordinarily go for this kind of information, but they probably summarize it nicely, and they cite their source as the Journal of the American Medical Association. Convalescent plasma is, quote, futile, or futile if you prefer that pronunciation, in treating severe COVID-19 cases, according to research. Monique Beals writing this up for The Hill. Scientists from the University of Pittsburgh found that convalescent plasma treatment is futile to treat critically ill COVID-19 patients, according to findings from a study published Monday in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Convalescent plasma treatment. It sounded like a good idea early on, and I know it was a popular thing, and I guess not a great answer for the severely ill. Convalescent plasma treatment involves taking blood containing antibodies from recovered COVID-19 patients and infusing it into people who are currently fighting the virus. The antibodies were thought to have some ability to help with the recovery process for active infections. Though the treatment style was successful for Ebola, it was deemed ineffective for the most critically ill patients with COVID-19, according to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Despite other trial results, there's still been a lot of interest in using this treatment for COVID-19 patients in the hospital. The University of Pittsburgh's Brian McVeary, who was a co-lead author for the study, said to the Post-Gazette, "I think that the evidence we provide in this study should put to rest the question of whether there's any benefit from this intervention in hospitalized patients," he added. The study found that the treatment resulted in a low likelihood of providing improvement for severe COVID-19 patients, and that would be anybody in the hospital probably. And really, honestly, you probably shouldn't be trying any convalescent plasma or any kind of plasma infusions outside of the hospital and at home. Don't do that. I mean, there's people out there thinking about some pretty weird and exotic treatments for themselves and things that really can't be administered at home. And I think I put away a thread from last week about one of the more wild ones, or people were like, can I put myself on a heart-lung bypass machine and oxygenate my blood outside of my body to help alleviate my suffering from COVID-19? And the answer is don't do that at all, ever, if you can avoid it. And two, if you have to do that, probably you want to do that with proper medical supervision. Don't just buy a machine at home for however many hundreds of thousands of dollars it might cost you and say, I'll just put a hose in my neck and take all of the blood out of my body and put it over there and then pump it back in. It's a pretty complicated machine. But people were really actually contemplating doing that. Anyway, where were we? The study found that, low likelihood of improving the situation for severe COVID-19 patients. We speculate that it could be a combination of too few high-quality antibodies in the plasma and these patients being too far along in their illness with a runaway inflammatory immune response for those antibodies to turn the tide. Derek Angus, senior author for the study, told the Post-Gazette. Finally, despite the treatment's lack of success, McVeary added that the prevention of hospitalization is the number one treatment for COVID-19, and that prevention comes in the form of vaccination, just to be clear. So,
oh my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks.
That's pretty much it. That's the conclusion. And that was nice. Good idea and good communication strategy to make sure that you get that mention in there, and a great way really to wind up your interview with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Look, we investigated this thing. Unfortunately, we found that it didn't work very well, but let me remind you that the best way to not find yourself with COVID-19 severe enough to kill you is to get the effing vaccine. We tried this other thing, and we began experimenting with it from before there was a vaccine, but the real answer is get the vaccine. Or again, as Greg puts it,
oh my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks.
Yeah, and it wasn't even Greg's words. He was just reading the headline. It's not his fault. All right, let's see. Other stories. Lots to choose from. And many different directions to go. So scrolling back just to see what other things I think were of some interest. We never did read that thing aloud. Maybe we should head over to the AT&T story at this point, or we can have the last segment perhaps after, because less than 10 minutes to the next break. So perhaps we hang on to it. What's this? What have I got here? I got to open up some of the tweets. That was the original alert I got from the tweet of Jake Sherman, the Punch Bowl guy, right? He was the one to tweet out the news that McConnell had just told Senate Republicans that he was going to offer this short-term debt ceiling extension deal. So, okay, now we know where that one came from. Let's see. There's a couple of other really ridiculous things floating around, and some things that we started the other day that we thought it might be worth continuing with. Here we go. Here's something that I mentioned as we were exiting the show one day, and we never did get to discuss it in full. Another NPR story from end of last week. I guess this would be Thursday of last week was Wednesday was September 29th, I think, right? So after 25 years in the dark, the CDC, remember them? Have you heard of them lately? The CDC wants to study the true toll of guns in America. One of the elections matter things that comes from electing Joe Biden as president and having a majority in the House and Senate under Democratic control. The long blackout on the CDC's ability to discuss and investigate guns as a healthcare problem in this country may finally fall by the wayside. We hope so. The uniquely American epidemic of mass killings by firearms grabs most of the attention from the media, politicians, and the public. And the big increase in homicides in 2020 and overall violent crime on the rise, maybe, across many American cities also get their share of coverage. But that's not what's at stake here. And by the way, writing credit for this piece, Eric Westervelt. And I like the approach to the big splashy stuff, but that's not what we're talking about. And the transition. But for decades, the devastating impact of non-fatal firearm injuries in the U.S. has been understudied, undercovered by the media, and often overlooked. Very true. A lot like COVID in that respect. Lots of focus on the deaths, and particularly among critics of masks and vaccines, etc. And only 1% of the people die. Well, it's actually considerably more. I mean, as percentages go, the numbers don't sound that much more impressive. It was like about 1.6% death rate effectively at the moment in the United States for COVID. And you might think that's nothing, but 0.6% of a population of 330 million is a lot of people. But we don't all have it yet. Only about 45 million of us have it now, that we know of. Anyway, but again, long COVID or the various after effects of having a COVID infection. Well, we still don't know a whole lot about that, but it does linger, and people have after effects. And even if you aren't killed by the virus, there could be some serious implications for you. Similarly, of course, we focus on the deaths with guns, but being accidentally shot, or purposefully shot for that matter, doesn't really matter why you're shot. The fact that you're shot is what matters. And all we get in the newspaper article is, well, the child is expected to recover, or he was expected to make a full recovery with a limp, so sports career is over, or, may have difficulty working and may be temporarily disabled or partially disabled, possibly for the rest of their life, but they're not dead, so that counts as full recovery for the immediate purposes of the newspaper article that follows the event, and then there's no follow-up. So, for decades, the devastating impact of non-fatal firearms injuries in the U.S. has been understudied, undercovered by the media, and often overlooked. Political pressure from the gun lobby, regulations, and disordered and highly segmented collection systems have created chronically unreliable data and information that obscure our true understanding of the public health, financial, psychological, and social toll of gun injuries, according to a 2020 study on firearms. Whose study was it? I don't know. It's linked here. Let's open up the link and see if we can find the state of firearms data in 2019, presented by, well, I don't know what NORC is, N-O-R-C, at the University of Chicago. So you tell me if it rings a bell. You can look it up, but I wish I knew off the top of my head. Well, that didn't answer anything. So back to the article. You can look it up later when we're not live on the radio. We know from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention data that just over 100 people on average are killed by firearms in the U.S. every day. Yikes. That includes crimes, suicides, gun accidents, and shootings involving law enforcement, which are huge. And apparently, in a totally separate story somewhere else, probably pull up the fact that, that number proves to be about twice what we thought it was, which is amazing that we can't even count that. I mean, how hard is it to figure out whether the person who shot somebody is a cop or not? But how often is someone injured by a firearm in America? Why, how, and what kinds of weapons are used? What are the underlying causes? What's the relationship between shooter and victim? What evidence-based scalable programs work best to help prevent criminal shootings, accidents, and suicides? On these and other questions, people in public health, criminal justice, policing, and academia admit they lack full and adequate answers. We just don't know. They're partly in the dark because for more than 2 decades, the gun lobby and Republican allies in Congress effectively blocked federal funding for firearms research, arguing that such a study would undermine the constitutional right to the rights of lawful gun owners. And as a result of that and other factors, experts say, in-depth gun data collection and sharing in the U.S. is a tangled mess that undermines objective research on programs and policies intended to prevent firearm injury, suicide, and criminal violence, which, by the way, you would think that lawful gun owners would encourage. The CDC under Dr. Rochelle Walensky says that they will now finally start to change. That's great. And for the thousands of Americans affected, survival and recovery from gun injuries look very different for each individual. And accompanying that news are a few of the stories of people injured by guns. And, well, you can imagine what kinds of problems they face. And if you can't imagine it, well, you can read it here. I don't think that's how we'll focus our time here, but just good news about the change in culture and policy at CDC. Long time coming. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. You know what? I think I might have persuaded myself to change directions, or rather to stay on the current path. I was reading over the stories, and I mean, they're very typical of lots of stories, but I think that argues in favor of reading and sharing them. I guess just in terms of reinforcing the need for study of the gun problem as a healthcare problem, because, you know, think about it doesn't even require any of these stories or that much thinking, but just a minute or two of thinking about what do you think it costs us in terms of healthcare costs, and who bears those healthcare costs when someone is shot and, quote unquote, makes a full recovery or makes even just a partial recovery. And those perhaps are even the more expensive of them all. I don't know whether, and maybe it's that gun enthusiasts have a different picture of what happens to people, or they think, their mind runs to the through and through bullet wounds that they get when they accidentally shoot themselves in the hand while cleaning a gun, and they get lucky and it doesn't take out, bones and tendons and such, or whatever, or something in the fleshy part of the thigh or something. But there's not that many places you can punch a hole in a human body and have it come out okay in the end. It happens, but not that often. So let me share some of these stories. Actually kind of interesting and intriguing, and the different ways that the people find themselves on the wrong end of a shooting, too. That's another thing to think about. Jennifer Longden from Phoenix is the first such story. They're not that long. It's well crafted just to give you a taste of the tragedy and how it happens and how confusing it all is pretty quickly. In 2004, Jennifer Longden and her then fiancé, David, had recently returned from a vacation and were about to get dinner at a local Mexican food drive-thru. They were grabbing tacos, holding hands, and talking wedding details. Everything's fine, right? Out of nowhere, a pickup truck sideswiped their car, and someone inside opened fire with a handgun. 5 bullets later, both were near death. Both suffered life-changing injuries. Longden's fiancé was shot 3 times, including once in the head and the shoulder. So thinking now about what was lost in all of this. The martial arts instructor and former Taekwondo champion suffered severe brain damage. He is medically incapacitated. He's now blind. He has no sense of smell. His hearing is diminished. And he has a very significant brain injury that impacts how he thinks, Longdon says. Alive. He's recovered, right? But totally different life. Everything he had was gone. The last bullet fired from the pickup truck struck Longdon in her back. She is now paralyzed just below her collarbone. She uses a wheelchair. Now, people sometimes wonder, every time there's a shooting, and gun enthusiasts in particular, or anybody really, is trying to have to explain things or answer against the charges of what should we be doing about the gun problem. Well, what did they do? They brought it on themselves. They were probably in a gang or what have you. Well, clearly these people are not. There was no discernible why to the shooting. No road rage or drug deal gone bad. The shooting was totally random and inexplicable. No one has ever been arrested. There are currently no suspects, despite rewards and an investigation. You can theorize a million different ways what was the cause, Langdon says. I don't know. There would be no wedding. They didn't stay together. Their lives were soon consumed by surgeries, outpatient therapy, and adjusting to life with a disability. Longdon still finds it hard to rethink some details from the night of their shooting. With her survival questionable, her ex-husband, she had been married before, her ex-husband brought their then 12-year-old son to her bedside in the hospital trauma room. And there's my little boy, she says, her voice cracking, and he's trying to comfort me, and his face is so pale, and his eyes are so wild, and he's stroking my hair that's just full of blood, telling me it's going to be okay, and the thing that I will always remember is that he was so afraid and so brave, and that happens to children across our country every single day. We're always focusing on the ones that actually got shot, but, the people around them, too. The effects of that on them. The CDC is now hoping to get a fuller picture of the data and long-neglected details on the impact of daily gun violence. The CDC and the National Institutes of Health, for the first time in nearly a quarter century, are funding new research on guns to help reduce firearm-related injuries, deaths, crimes, and suicides. Among several other gun research projects, the CDC is now providing funding to 10 state health departments so they can start collecting data in near real time on emergency room non-fatal firearm injuries. This will allow doctors and epidemiologists to potentially identify trends and craft swift interventions, as they have done to contain the coronavirus pandemic and other national health emergencies. Longdon was elected to the Arizona House of Representatives in 2018, by the way. Today, she is the Assistant Democratic Minority Leader in the State House. Among her top state priorities are disability rights and public health-based gun violence prevention. She welcomes the renewal of federal gun research, but says it needs to grow far beyond the initial funding. Non-fatal injuries do not get the attention that they deserve, she says. The best policy comes from having great data, and so that's the first thing we need to fix. Another story, that of Laura Morris of Annapolis, Maryland. In her 20s, Laura Morris was married to an abusive man with alcohol and drug problems. You see where this one goes pretty quickly, but the physical and emotional torment, she says, steadily got worse, especially when he was drunk or high. He would beat me and berate me, Morris says. One night, after heavy drinking, he returned home and, as usual, began threatening and assaulting her. But this time, he brandished an unregistered handgun he'd bought for $25 at a local bar. That's where this happens. He pushed me on the sofa and put the gun to my stomach and said, "Gut shots hurt the worst," Morris says. Morris is not really sure what happened next. She heard the gun go off. She felt frozen, unable to move. And I thought, oh my God, he actually killed me. And I remember just sitting there thinking, okay, what happens now? And all the thoughts go through your head. Who's going to find my body? What's going to happen to my son? All these things, she says. Her husband fell to the living room floor, drunk and despondent, shouting, I killed her, she says. Then she remembers taking a deep breath, and at that moment I could smell gunpowder. And I looked, and I could see, out of the corner of my eye, there was smoke coming out of my jacket. Morris thinks that when her husband pressed the handgun against her stomach, she pushed his arm away, knocking the handgun upward as he fired. The bullet went through her shoulder, as well as the sofa, and lodged in a nearby wall. She says her husband was contrite, but soon the routine was back. Hitting and abuse followed by apologies. Morris physically recovered from her gunshot wound without seeking medical attention. She didn't call the police either. She was too scared to leave, but worried every day about the next time. And next time he won't miss, she remembers thinking. He always said if I ever left him, he would shoot me in the back of the head when I least expected it. It was just that everyday, constant terror. One day he came home high, and his typical pattern of abusing her followed. Her usual survival strategy involved grabbing her son when her husband went into the bathroom. They'd then drive around the neighborhood until her husband had passed out. That night, when she went into her son's room, she says, the little boy was standing there with his coat on and blanket in hand, all ready to go. Like he knew from the yelling that this was going to happen. And I thought, we can't live like this. You know, he's growing up thinking that this is normal, she says. The next morning, she woke up determined. I'd rather be dead than live this way. 3 or 4 times a week, I'd wake up and think, wow, this could be the last day, she remembers. This could be the day he kills me. And I thought, who thinks like that? She finally left. Her life didn't get better right away. It took a lot of work and time. There was baggage to unpack, she said, but eventually it got better. My life took a good turn. She's happily remarried and is about to retire from a successful career in sales and marketing. These days, Morris is active in several groups supporting people who've survived gun violence and domestic abuse, including work as a peer support group coordinator for Everytown for Gun Safety in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. She also helped found and run the organization's Wounded Survivors Affinity Group. People wounded by gun violence, she says, often have a hard time talking about and unpacking the trauma. She did. She recalls the first time she told her full story in public. I almost didn't get through it, she says, and I had to pull the garbage can over to the podium because I thought I was going to vomit. I couldn't stop crying, and I think it was just that it was the first time that I had said it out loud to people. Survivors need places to talk and connect with other survivors, she says. Another area for research, right? It can be a lonely sort of place because where do you bring that up in conversation? Oh, by the way, did I ever tell you that I was shot? And when you do tell people, she says, there's often a mixture of shock and horror, and they ask all these questions, and you may not feel comfortable at that moment answering questions about that. She'd like to see these kinds of support groups grow and involve younger people affected by gun violence. There's the misconception, and I had that misconception. Well, you survived, so you must be okay, she says. And that's not true. Very important. Last one here, James Hinckley Wade. Oh, an unfortunate name to have when you're involved in a shooting, but Hinckley. But James Hinckley Wade of Phoenix, also Phoenix. Phoenix, you have a problem. James Hinckley Wade's story starts with a routine house party. He was 17, and he describes himself back then as lost and consumed by drug dealing and gang life. One night, he and some friends, he says, were getting drunk, hanging out, goofing off, and trying to impress girls and each other. Hinckley Wade remembers beers, weed, and a backflip contest. I remember, he says, tucking against one of my homeboys I went to junior high school with. You know, just having a good time. He says, from there, it just gets kind of dark. Bending to peer pressure, he says he smoked a cigarette that had been dipped in PCP. You know, they go on to describe it in case you want to care about the names, the street names it uses. But anyway, it was like out of a horror movie. My body went into some crazy trance and my whole being just left me, he says. A short time later, out on the street with friends, things spiraled further. They ran into a possible member of a rival gang. Hinckley Wade beat him up. I was high. I jumped on this dude for nothing, pretty much, he says. The bruised rival returned about an hour later with a friend and a 9mm handgun. And so I started approaching that dude, and he pulled out a pistol. Lord, forgive me, Jesus' name. Yeah, he pulled out a pistol. Well, now he's into the Jesus thing. Well, better than what he was into, I guess. A bullet hit his spinal cord. He hit my main artery in my neck, Hinckley Wade explains. He's now paralyzed from the chest down. He uses a motorized wheelchair to get around. Looking back, Hinckley Wade says it all stemmed from immaturity, teenage bravado, and his efforts to get the attention of a high-ranking gang member who was in town from California. I was trying to impress him, like I've been doing the whole time since I started gangbanging, trying to impress. For nothing, Hinckley Wade says, choking up. For nothing. These days, Hinckley Wade plays and teaches wheelchair power soccer and sits on the Phoenix Police Department's Disability Advisory Board. He also does volunteer work with violence prevention groups and Ability 360, an independent living center for people with disabilities. He says that through peer mentoring young people involved in drugs, crime, and gangs, he tries to help them make better decisions than the ones he made. We know people are going to get mad. We know they're going to get angry. He says mentoring can help young people express that or get that out before people start wanting to pick up guns. They could probably prevent a lot of this violence just by talking to somebody before it happened. But who funds that effort, right? Unknown. Anyway, interesting story. Once again, life turned around. He's alive. Full recovery? You tell me. But we have no idea comprehensively of what this is costing us, how many people are having to deal with it, what might even, forget the cost, what might make their lives better, what might help them get something closer to a fuller recovery, though they'll never have a full recovery necessarily. But what ought we to be offering them in the wake of a shooting like that? It's a very interesting question. And I'm thrilled to see that may change. And of course I worry because, we face the prospect of a Republican-dominated legislature on the national level again, possibly, not to mention, of course, having to fight our way through the 2024 election, and possibly on less than even terms and right on fair terms and even ground. Well, we've discussed that plenty too. All right, man. Well, I really wasn't thinking I was going to end up there, but I did want to bring that story to your attention, and then all the stories that went along with it. Just I think are important context. There was another story that I thought that I mentioned, that I hinted when what were we doing? We were reading about, down in Arkansas, all the town names that I wasn't sure how to pronounce. Following up on something that I got 2 or 3 comments about, I think, what was the story we were reading? We were reading about the Boogaloo Boy wacko who, from Texas, who somehow shows up in Minneapolis in the George Floyd protests and disguises himself or attempts to make the people around him think that he's some sort of Antifa activist, and firing his, as they say, AK-47 style rifle into the police station once it had been abandoned and set afire. And one of the side notes in the story was that he was from a town in Texas that I wasn't sure of the pronunciation of. Boere. Is that right? Boerne. I should call it. But it was, my best guess at it was, well, what is that? Bourne, Texas? Well, now I know the pronunciation. Let me find the story just so I can get it right in terms of the spelling. Now I have to worry about the spelling. Yeah, Boerne. Well, I am reliably informed that the pronunciation of that town is actually Boerne, Texas. Boerne. Now that's just wrong, but that's what they call it down there, Boerne, Texas. And that, of course, made me think, oh, maybe I can remember it because Bernie Sanders, right? Something like that. That might help. But John Ronald, who is from down in Texas, made mention of that. Also, Judy Vincent, who's now living in, well, I don't know where you are currently because she moves back and forth. Oh, that's right. She was out on the cruise, right? So she's been back at her home base in Hawaii, but originally from Texas. And so personal story there. I just have to hand out belated congratulations to her husband, who, as it turns out, is the 1971 winner of the Boerne the high school speech contest there. So it's been a while. I've neglected to get around to it. I'm sorry, I'm like 50 years late on this, but congratulations. I didn't know at the time. I was 3, I think. And anyway, so congratulations on that. But yes, Bernie, and that may give me an idea, the Bernie speech contest. We ought to have a Bernie speech contest on the show here. And so people should tape themselves doing their best Bernie imitations and giving a speech. Send it in, and we can declare a new Bernie speech contest winner. There hasn't been one for 50 years. There's probably one annually, but we only care about the one that won it 50 years ago. The rest of you, whatever. Congratulations, good job. But, you're not related to the show. Anyway, there's a number of towns that are like that. And, I'm always interested in the local angle on the pronunciation. And it always pays to get things right, even if it's after the fact, by several days, and distracting you from talking about all the other important things that you're supposed to be getting to. Let's see. Other stories. We're clearly going to have to delay the AT&T story for another day. That's a lengthy piece. Sort of interested in scrolling further back and seeing if I can rescue another of the missed stories and share them with you here. Let's see. Why am I still saving this? Oh, right. No, I think we did discuss that one. So we should be getting rid of that one. Okay, just show notes that you probably don't need at this point. Let's see. Other story. I'm going to scroll back a little bit more. Oh, yeah. No, we did read that one, too. I might have to search through Twitter instead to find the various things that people have been suggesting. I want to scroll back a little bit. I know that Patrick Snyder had sent something along that was, as usual, worthy of sharing, and I didn't get to. And, how many others are there? All right. Okay. I'll just jump right into this one. He was sharing the thread from internet sensation, the Horse Whisperer, who, in case you haven't somehow encountered him on Twitter, the Real Horse, Horse, the Horse Whisperer, right? Last comment we've joined at the end of, I guess, a day's worth of rants, but this thread counts as the last comment on some lengthier discourse. My last comment about that candidate with the good ad everyone is sharing. Yes, right. Have you seen this thing? I saw being circulated fairly heavily the other day, an ad, I'm sure a web-based ad, because it was very lengthy. It was a long ad, and anytime you see an ad that's more than 30 seconds, even if it's just 1 minute, you can be pretty sure that it's web only, because a 1 minute commercial on TV is extraordinarily expensive as opposed to the standard 30 seconds. And of course, if the video is 2 minutes and 39 seconds, then you know that it's got nowhere near TV. But someone had crafted a very fine looking ad, and everyone was very impressed with the story that was being told, which was of a local community of minorities rising up in defense of themselves and pushing back on local Ku Klux Klan organizing and confronting a Klan rally and asserting themselves and winning their freedom from the terror of the Klan. And it was a very dramatic telling and a great story and a nice ad, and everybody was sharing it and saying, we really ought to, with the idea, we ought to get behind this guy and his bid for Congress, because we need somebody who can tell this kind of story and can organize this kind of resistance. Well, it wasn't a day or two had gone by before somebody was out there saying, this guy is not without a public record, by the way, and as nice as this story is, he's, I believe, a state legislator, and, he's got a voting record that overall progressives probably wouldn't be proud of on the whole, right? Okay, so anyway, this was of some interest. My last comment about that candidate with the good ad that everyone is sharing. So a general comment here and a general thought. In 2018 and 2020, we repeatedly rushed in super early to back candidates that we, ultimately I would say, knew nothing about in districts we didn't understand. We poured a lot of money into candidates that we liked from early ads. As a result, we ended up, 1, backing some of the wrong horses and losing where we might have won with a different candidate, or 2, overfunding some campaigns while others could have used the money. Midterm elections are now a year away, and we can't afford to back the wrong horses or misspend this time. We also can't afford to pour excess time, money, or attention into races that are entirely out of reach. This was a big critique of the Senate race in Kentucky, for instance, and the amount of money that got spent in the hopes somehow of defeating Mitch McConnell in his last election, right? And lots of money that got spent down there backing a candidate that ultimately just couldn't, and maybe no one could have gotten the job done in that election, but a tremendous amount of resources that we found in hindsight, that we wish perhaps had been directed elsewhere. As solid as a candidate, in terms of putting up a decent fight as Amy McGrath was, ultimately it was just not a likely thing. And the polling showed pretty early on that it wasn't a likely win, but everyone was so determined to be rid of McConnell because they were so angry at him. They spent, and it's your right to spend a certain amount of money on that, I guess. But anyway, back to the thread. As Horse Whisperer was saying, there are going to be a lot of good ads for candidates. A bunch of them will go viral. This time around, we need to learn from the last couple cycles. I don't think any of our early national crushes won. Can't think of a candidate who had a viral first ad who won. I don't know whether that's really a thorough examination of the problem, but maybe he's misremembering. But generally speaking, hero worship in general, probably something to be avoided here. We have to be a bit more measured this time, especially we blue staters who just love red state candidates who fit in with us more than their districts. This time, we need to take more direction from people who know the district, race, and candidates. Great ads are energizing. There will be plenty. They are like profiles on dating sites, though. We ought to get through a date or two, at least before falling in love. No chasing early crushes this time. We did that. It didn't work. Now we know. Well, it's good advice. It doesn't work very well for me because it takes considerably more than that to get me to move to the level where I'm giving money. And it's a rare thing for me to see an ad and say, it's a rare thing for me to see an ad and say, gosh, that's a good ad, because I'm pretty tough on ads. And most of the time when people say, you've got to see this thing, including this latest one, and I guess I now have to go and dig up that ad and provide it for you. But I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, it's good. But yeah, it's not something that makes me say, God, we can't live without that person in Congress fighting the good fight. I'm just not moved by stuff like that generally. But, not a whole lot of people are. But if you are one of those people, I would suggest perhaps that this time around, what's other good advice? And we can dig up some good sources for you to think about. But certainly Charles Geba takes a good look at these things. And a couple of our other friends here on the show, Blair Reeves with his North Carolina project. What is it? It's the longleaf pine slate, right? And there are a couple other people doing similar work. All the names are escaping me at the moment besides those two, but there are several who focus on state legislative races. And the really great point about the state legislative race focus is that your money really can make a huge difference. If you've got dollars to give and are looking to spread some around, putting them into state legislative races where $100 in a congressional race is not huge, and it's nice and they'll take it and it helps. to be sure, but $100, it has, 10 times more impact in a state legislative race. Now, how do you keep up on who's good in state legislative races in states that aren't your own? Well, like I said, there's a couple places you can turn to for good information about that, and people you can trust to give you decent information about these things. But like, for instance, Give Smart, right? And the let's see, that was I know him on Twitter as Bobby Big Wheel, and you can follow him too. And now his actual real name escapes me. But the Give Smart project was focusing on just that, finding and identifying good, strong candidates, either who are incumbents or challengers in state legislative races, and having that much more impact with your money, and also remembering that those are the people who very often handle redistricting for those congressional races in competitive states anyway. Now, of course, working with States Project US, if you want to find them on Twitter, just so you can find out what they might recommend in terms of making those donations on a state level. And of course, like I said, our friend Blair, who you can find on Twitter as well. Let's see. Why can't I find him immediately? There you are. Blair Reeves, BlairReeves. And he's handed us stories about this before. Brain Rap, Charles Gaiba pays good attention to this. Think about making donations, particularly, by the way, in the off-year elections like we have for the legislature here in Virginia. Just a little pitch for my little Commonwealth.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, okay, up next, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, and you can get back on track with the major news from around the country and around the world instead of the sidetrack I took you on. For instance, he will be picking up the very important news of the Senate Judiciary Committee's new report. Why not tune in and give it a listen with Justice?